In a small town called Oak Ridge, James Miller sat alone in his flat. The clock showed 6 in the morning. He hadn't slept all night. 3 letters lay on his table, all saying the same thing. "We regret to inform you." James had lost his job at the local newspaper where he had worked for 15 years. At 51, James felt lost. The newspaper had gone digital, and younger reporters who understood computers better took his place. His savings would only last 2 months. Rent was due next week. James looked around his small flat. Photos from his reporting days covered one wall. In them he smiled, holding his notepad, proud of his work. Now that wall seemed to mock him. The kettle whistled. James made tea and watched the street below come to life. People hurried to their jobs knowing where they belonged. He envied them. His phone rang. It was his brother William. "How are you holding up?" William asked. "Fine," James lied. He couldn't tell his successful younger brother how bad things were. "Listen, Lucy and I were thinking. Why don't you come stay with us until you sort things out?" James gripped his cup tighter. "I'm not a charity case, Will." "It's not charity. It's family." "I'll be fine," James insisted. "Something will turn up." After hanging up, James put on his coat. He needed fresh air. Outside, autumn leaves covered the pavement. The morning was crisp and clear. Without planning to, James found himself at the community center. A small sign caught his eye. "Volunteers needed. Reading program for visually impaired." James almost walked past. Then he stopped. His old editor always said he had a voice for radio. Perhaps this was something he could do while job hunting. Inside, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes sat at the desk. "Hello," she said. "Can I help you?" "I'm interested in the reading program," James replied, surprising himself. The woman, who introduced herself as Dorothy, smiled warmly. "Wonderful. I'm the coordinator. We're desperate for male readers. Many of our listeners prefer different voices for variety." James filled out a form, feeling uncertain. "I've never done anything like this before. I was a newspaper reporter." Dorothy's eyes lit up. "Even better. You understand the importance of words." James left with instructions to return the next day. For the first time since losing his job, he felt a tiny spark of purpose. That evening, he practiced reading aloud from his old newspaper articles. His voice sounded strange to his ears after years of writing words rather than speaking them. The next morning, James arrived at the community center 15 minutes early. His stomach fluttered with nerves. Dorothy introduced him to the small recording room. "Today you'll record a short story for our listeners. Many of them are elderly and housebound, and your voice will be their window to the world." James cleared his throat and began reading a simple story about a fishing village. At first, his voice trembled. Then he remembered how he used to interview people, making them comfortable drawing out their stories. Gradually, his confidence grew. The words flowed more naturally. When he finished, Dorothy clapped. "That was lovely, James. You have a gift." It felt good, he admitted, to use words again. On his way home, James passed the cafe where he used to write his articles. On impulse, he went in and ordered coffee. The young barista, Emma, recognized him. "Mr. Miller, haven't seen you in ages. Still writing those brilliant pieces?" James hesitated, then answered honestly. "The paper let me go. I'm between jobs at the moment." Emma frowned. "That's their loss. Your piece about the old lighthouse saved it from demolition. My granddad worked there for 40 years. James remembered that story fondly. It had won a local award. "Actually," Emma continued, "my granddad's care home is always looking for people to talk to the residents. Many of them feel forgotten. Someone who can tell stories like you would brighten their days." For the second time that day, James felt that small spark grow. Perhaps his words still had value, even if not on printed pages. As he walked home, James noticed things he'd missed before: the detailed carvings on the old town hall, children playing in the park, an elderly man feeding birds. For years he'd written about the town's stories. Now perhaps he was beginning a new one of his own. That night, instead of staring at rejection letters, James made a list of places where his voice might matter. The first step on a new path. The end, 2 weeks had passed since James started volunteering at the reading program. Each Tuesday and Thursday, he walked to the community center with a lightness in his step that surprised him. His bank account was still worryingly low, but something else was filling up inside him. Today, Dorothy met him with an excited smile. "James, I've had 3 phone calls about your recordings. The listeners love your voice." James felt his cheeks warm. "Really? I'm just reading the words." "No." Dorothy shook her head. "You bring them to life. Mrs. Thomas from Oakwood Care Home said your reading of that seaside story made her feel like she was walking on the beach again." James smiled, remembering the elderly woman he'd met during his first visit to deliver. Recordings. She had clasped his hand and told him about summers spent by the sea as a girl. "I have something special for you today," Dorothy said, handing him several handwritten pages. "Robert from the care home wrote this himself. He'd like you to record his story." James looked down at the careful handwriting. Robert was a 93-year-old, former farmer who had fought in the war. His story was about the dog who had kept him company during those dark times. In the small recording booth, James cleared his throat and began reading. The simple words painted a picture of courage and friendship. By the final page, James's voice cracked with emotion. Dorothy wiped a tear from her eye when he emerged. "Perfect," she whispered. After the recording session, James decided to deliver the tape to Robert himself. The walk to Oakwood Care Home took 20 minutes through the town park. The autumn leaves crunched beneath his feet. At the care home, the receptionist, Helen, greeted him warmly. "You must be James. The residents talk about you all the time. They're in the common room for afternoon tea." James followed her down a bright hallway. In a sunny room, about 15 elderly people sat in armchairs. Some were alert, others dozed. A nurse was pouring tea. "Everyone," Helen announced. "This is James, the man with the golden voice." Several faces lit up. A thin man with bright blue eyes raised a shaky hand. "I'm Robert," he said. "Did you bring my story?" James sat beside him, pulling out the tape. "Just finished recording it. Would you like to hear it now?" Robert nodded eagerly. The nurse brought over a player, and soon James's voice filled the room, telling Robert's tale of his faithful dog, Rusty. Other residents stopped their conversations to listen. When the story ended, Robert's eyes shone. "You made him real again," he whispered. "Rusty's been gone 60 years, but just now I could almost feel his fur." A woman in the corner called out, "I have a story too, about the time I danced with a famous actor during the war. Could you read mine next?" Before James knew it, he was surrounded by elderly people, each wanting to share their memories. The afternoon stretched into early evening as he listened, making notes on the backs of envelopes, promising to return. Walking home in the gathering dusk, James felt strangely energized. His phone rang. It was William again. "Just checking in," his brother said. "Any luck with the job hunt?" James hesitated. "Not exactly, but I've started volunteering, reading for people who can't read themselves." "That's nice, James, but it doesn't pay the bills." "I know that," James replied, with less anger than he expected to feel. "But it's important." After hanging up, James stopped at the small cafe where Emma worked. She waved him over. "Mr. Miller, how's the volunteering going?" James told her about Robert and the others at the care home. "They have such amazing stories, Emma. A lifetime of experiences just waiting to be shared." Emma leaned forward. "You know, I've been thinking. Our cafe has empty space on Thursday evenings. The owner's been wanting to host community events. What if you did a storytelling night? People could come listen to some of these stories you're collecting." James blinked. "Who would want to hear an old man read other old people's stories?" "Everyone loves a good story," Emma insisted. "We could charge a small entry fee, split it between you and the care home." For the first time in weeks, James thought about money without feeling sick. It wasn't a proper job, but it was something. That night, James sat at his small table and began typing on his old laptop. He organized Robert's story, adding descriptions of the man himself, his bright eyes, his gnarled hands. Then he started on Mrs. Thomas's beach memories. Without realizing it, James was writing again. Not news articles, but something more personal, more meaningful. As midnight approached, he titled the document, Voices of Oak Ridge, Stories Worth Remembering. Outside, the wind rustled through the autumn leaves. James felt something he hadn't felt since the day those rejection letters arrived. Hope. The end James stood at the back of Emma's cafe, counting the chairs for the third time. 25 seats were arranged in neat rows. A small table with a lamp sat at the front. It was Thursday evening, his first storytelling night. "Stop worrying," Emma said, bringing him a cup of tea. "People will come." James wasn't so sure. He had spent the week visiting care homes, collecting more stories, typing them up at night. His fingers were stiff from typing, his eyes tired. But the stories, they were wonderful. Lives full of love, loss, adventure, and ordinary moments, made special through time. The door opened 15 minutes before start time. James felt his heart jump. A young couple with a teenage daughter entered, paid the £5 entry fee, and took seats near the back. "We read about this in the local paper," the woman said. "Our daughter is doing a school project on local history." James hadn't known about any newspaper mention. Emma grinned and held up the small-town paper. "I might have called in a favor from my cousin who works there." By 7 o'clock, 18 people had arrived. Not a full house, but more than James had dared hope for. The crowd was mixed. Some elderly people, families, a teacher from the local school, and Dorothy from the community center, beaming proudly. Emma introduced James with a warmth that made his cheeks flush. He walked to the front, carrying his folder of stories, suddenly aware of all the eyes on him. "Good evening," he began, his voice shakier than when he recorded. "I'm not a professional storyteller. Until recently, I wrote newspaper articles about other people's lives. Now I'm lucky enough to share some of those lives directly with you." James opened his folder and began with Robert's story. As he read, his voice grew stronger. He looked up occasionally to see faces fully engaged, some smiling, others serious. When he described how Robert's dog had saved his life during a blizzard, a young boy in the front row gasped. Next came Mrs. Thomas's memories of wartime dances, then Mr. Phillips's tale of building boats for 50 years. James added descriptions of the storytellers themselves, their faces, their hands, the way their eyes lit up when remembering. When he finished the fourth story, James noticed an elderly man in the corner wiping tears from his eyes. The man caught James looking and nodded in acknowledgement. During the break, people bought drinks and cakes. Emma was rushing around, happier than James had ever seen her. "This is amazing," she whispered as she passed. "Old Mr. Bentley over there says he knows Robert from the war. He wants to add to the story next time." Next time. James hadn't thought that far ahead. For the second half, James read lighter stories. Mrs. Wilson's tale of winning a dance competition. In 1955, Mr. Cooper's memories of the day the Queen visited their small town. He ended with a short piece from 10-year-old Lily, who visited her grandmother at Oakwood and had written about what the elderly could teach the young. When the applause came, it was genuine and warm. People approached him afterward, some sharing brief memories of their own, others asking when the next event would be. The elderly man who had been crying introduced himself as George Bentley. "You've done a fine thing here," he said, his voice gruff. "People forget that the old have the best stories." James counted the money with Emma after everyone left. After the cafe's share, he had made £65. Not much, but it would help with groceries. "Same time next week?" Emma asked. James nodded, surprised at how eager he felt. Walking home, James's phone rang. It was William again. "Just checking," his brother said. "Any progress?" James took a deep breath. "I did a storytelling event tonight. People paid to hear me read stories from the elderly in our community." Silence on the other end, then, "You mean like a charity thing?" "No," James said firmly. "Like work. It doesn't pay much yet, but it's a start." After hanging up, James noticed an email on his phone from Dorothy. The subject line read, Opportunity. The community center had received funding for a project to record the oral histories of the town's oldest residents. They needed someone to collect and organize these stories. The grant would pay a part-time salary for 6 months. Your name came up in the committee meeting, Dorothy wrote. After the success of your recordings, everyone agreed you'd be perfect. It's not a fortune, but it would give you time to develop this wonderful thing you've started. James stopped, walking, and sat on a bench. Above him, stars were appearing in the darkening sky. His rent was due tomorrow. His savings were almost gone. But tonight, 18 people had listened to him give voice to forgotten stories. And now, a chance to do more. He typed a quick reply to Dorothy. I would be honored. For the first time, in months, James slept deeply that night, his dreams full of stories waiting to be told. The end 3 months had passed since James began the oral history project. Winter had settled over Oak Ridge, coating the town in frost and occasional snow. James no longer sat alone in his flat wondering about his future. His days were filled with purpose. Today he was visiting Oakwood Care Home again. Since October, he had conducted 37 interviews there. Each story was carefully recorded, typed, and saved for the town's historical archives. The weekly storytelling nights at Emma's Cafe had grown so popular they now needed tickets, with all profits going to support the care homes. James stamped snow from his boots in the entrance hall. Helen greeted him with a smile. She's ready for you, Helen said. Room 14, she's having a good day today. James nodded gratefully. Mrs. Eleanor Gray was 101 years old and the oldest resident in Oak Ridge. For weeks she had refused to be interviewed, but yesterday she had finally agreed. He knocked gently on her door. Come in, called a surprisingly strong voice. Mrs. Gray sat in an armchair by the window watching the falling snow. She was tiny, wrapped in a blue cardigan, her white hair neatly pinned up. Despite her age, her eyes were sharp and clear. You must be the story man, she said, looking James up and down. Sit down then. Don't waste my time. James smiled as he set up his recording equipment. He had learned not to be put off by initial gruffness. Often, the most reluctant storytellers had the most to share. I understand you've lived in Oak Ridge. Your entire life, Mrs. Gray, he began. She nodded. Born in 1923 in the house on Willow Street. My father built it himself. That's the old baker's shop now, James said. Her eyes lit up. You know it? Yes, we sold it when Father died. I was sorry to see it go. 6 generations of our family lived in that house. James asked gentle questions, letting Mrs. Gray set the pace. Slowly, her story emerged. She had been a schoolteacher for 47 years. She had taught 3 generations of Oak Ridge children, including the current mayor. They were all the same. She chuckled. Mischievous, but good at heart. Children don't change much, only their clothes and gadgets do. As they talked, James noticed a photograph on her bedside table, a handsome young man in an army uniform. My Thomas, she said, following his gaze. We were to be married when he returned from the war. He never did. James waited, giving her space. Everyone thinks I never married because I was waiting for him, Mrs. Gray continued, surprising James with her frankness. But that's not true. I loved again, several times. But I loved my freedom more. She told him about fighting to keep her teaching job after the war, when married women weren't allowed to teach, about traveling to France and Italy during school holidays, about the children she had guided and influenced. One became a famous writer, she said proudly. He sent me all his books, said I was the one who taught him to love stories. 2 hours passed quickly. When James finally turned off his recorder, Mrs. Gray looked tired but pleased. Will you come to our storytelling night sometime? James asked. The children from the primary school often attend now. They would love to meet a teacher from the old days. Mrs. Gray considered this. Perhaps if they have questions worth answering. As James packed up his equipment, Mrs. Gray suddenly asked, Why do you do this, Mr. Miller? Collecting old people's stories? The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that before. Spring had arrived in Oak Ridge. The town park bloomed, with daffodils and cherry blossoms. 1 year had passed since James had lost his newspaper job, a year that had changed everything. Today was special. James adjusted his tie as he stood in the town hall. Around him, people chatted excitedly, holding copies of a dark blue book titled Voices of Oak Ridge, Our Town, Our Stories. On the cover was a photograph of the town square from 1950, side by side with a modern image taken from the same spot. The mayor approached, shaking James's hand. "Quite a turnout," she said, looking at the crowd. "You've done something remarkable. Here, Mr. Miller." James smiled modestly. The book launch had drawn over 200 people, far more than he had expected. The hall was filled with residents from the care homes, families, teachers, students, and many others whose stories filled the pages. Emma had closed her cafe for the afternoon so she and her staff could attend. She now managed the weekly storytelling events, which had become so popular they had moved to the community center's larger space. "5 minutes until we start," Dorothy whispered, touching James's arm. As head of the community center, she would introduce him today. James nodded, suddenly feeling nervous. Public speaking still made his stomach twist, despite months of reading to audiences. This was different. This was the culmination of everything. His eyes scanned the crowd, catching familiar faces. Robert sat in his wheelchair near the front, proudly wearing his war medals. Mrs. Thomas waved cheerfully from her seat. And there, to his surprise, was Mrs. Eleanor Gray, looking regal despite her small frame, surrounded by former students who had come specially to see her. Even more surprising was the sight of William and his family entering the hall. James hadn't expected his brother to come. Dorothy stepped to the microphone and the room quieted. "Welcome everyone to the launch of Voices of Oak Ridge. 1 year ago, a talented journalist lost his job, and our community gained a treasure. James Miller has collected over 100 stories from our oldest residents, creating not just a book but a living history of our town." James walked to the podium amid warm applause. He looked down at his prepared speech, then set it aside. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "This book belongs to everyone in this room. It's your stories, your lives, your memories that fill these pages." He held up the book. Inside, you'll find Mrs. Gray's memories of teaching during wartime, when classrooms had gas masks instead of computers. You'll read about Robert's dog Rusty, who saved not just his master but 3 other soldiers on a freezing night in 1944. You'll discover how Mrs. Thomas met her husband at a dance hall that once stood where our supermarket is now. James paused, looking around the room. "When I started this project, I thought I was just recording history before it was lost. But I've learned that these aren't just stories of the past. They connect directly to our present and future." He gestured to a group of school children sitting cross-legged near the front. "These students have been visiting Oakwood Care Home every Friday, learning skills from our elders. Everything from knitting to chess to gardening. 2 new businesses in town were started by young people inspired by stories in this book." The mayor nodded in agreement. Tourism had increased as visitors came to see the places mentioned in the stories James had shared at his events and on the local radio station. "Most importantly," James continued, "people are talking to each other again, across generations, across differences. In a world where we often feel disconnected, these stories remind us of our shared humanity." After the speeches, James signed books and introduced people to each other. William approached, looking uncomfortable but determined. "This is impressive, James," he said. "I had no idea it was such a big project." James smiled. "Neither did I when it started." "I've been thinking," William said hesitantly. "My company does audiobooks. Would you be interested in recording these stories? Your voice. It really brings them to life." Before James could answer, Mrs. Gray appeared beside them, her eyes bright with mischief. "So this is your brother?" she said, looking William up and down. "Yes, I remember you. You put glue on Tommy Parker's chair in 1982. William turned red. "You remember that?" "Teachers remember everything, young man," she said with a smile. Then turning to James, The book is good, but you left out the best parts of my story. I saved those for volume 2, James replied with a wink. Later, as the event wound down, James stood by the window, watching people leave in groups, talking animatedly. Dorothy joined him. The library wants you to start a writing workshop, she said, for people to record their own family stories. James nodded. I'd like that. Outside, cherry blossoms drifted down like snow. A year ago, James had sat alone in his flat feeling worthless. Now he understood that losing his job had not been an ending but a beginning. In seeking out voices that might have been lost, he had found not just a new career, but a calling. The town had given him its stories, and in return he had helped Oak Ridge remember the value of listening. Some treasures, James had learned, were not hidden in the past, but in the quiet corners of ordinary lives, waiting for someone to simply ask. And here the end as a poster announcing a community publishing project. The town council, impressed by the oral history collection, had provided funding to publish selected stories in a proper book. James paused, looking at his name on the poster as editor. 6 months ago, he had been a jobless journalist with outdated skills. Now he was building something new from the very thing he did best, telling people stories. His phone rang. It was William. Just checking how you're doing, his brother said. Still doing that storytelling thing? Yes, James replied, and it's not just a thing anymore. It's becoming my life's work. For once, William was silent. Actually, James continued, I'm putting together a book. One of the stories is from a woman who taught at your school 40 years ago, Mrs. Eleanor Gray. Ring any bells? Mrs. Gray, William exclaimed. The dragon lady, she terrified us all. She's still alive? Very much so, James laughed. And she remembers everything, including, I suspect, what you did to the school hamster in 1982. They both chuckled, the awkwardness between them easing slightly. As James continued toward his flat to prepare for tonight's event, he felt the weight of the stories he carried, not as a burden, but as a privilege. In giving voice to others, he had found his own again. The end.